Okay, this says that in 2020, 64% of the US population identified as Christian and 30% identified as religiously unaffiliated. But by 2070, 48% are supposed to be religiously unaffiliated and 39% are supposed to be Christian. It's wild how steep the drop-off is for Christians, and it seems that the increase in religiously unaffiliated people, that climb is just as steep. It's almost like those two things have something to do with each other. I mean, in 2056, I would say, this graph says that religiously unaffiliated people will actually overtake Christians as the, I guess, religious majority in the country. Can you imagine an America where Christians are not the majority? I struggle to. All right, where did I get this graph and how did they get these just unbelievable numbers? Well, everything in this video comes from a Pew Research article released in September 2022. It's titled Modeling the Future of Religion in America. This is how the article explains how it got its projections. All the projections start from the current religious composition of the US population, taking account of religious differences by age and sex. Then they factor in birth rates and migration patterns. Most importantly, they incorporate varying rates of religious switching, movement into and out of broad categories of religious identity, to model what the US religious landscape would look like if switching stayed at its recent pace, continued to speed up as it's been doing since the 1990s, or suddenly halted. Switching rates are based on patterns observed in recent decades through 2019. For example, we estimate that 31% of people raised Christian become unaffiliated between ages 15 to 29, the tumultuous period in which religious switching is concentrated. An additional 7% of people raised Christian become unaffiliated later in life after the age of 30. Wow, 31% of people become unaffiliated between 15 and 29. Very interesting. I mean, that's when I became unaffiliated too, and just about everybody that I know became unaffiliated. Okay, now that we understand what the study's about, let's go ahead and look at some more of these graphs. There are different scenarios that they projected here. So, scenario 1, if switching continues at most recent rates, Christians would lose their majority by 2060, but in 2070 would still be the largest US religious group. This is just if switching rates remain the same, they don't increase or decrease at all. We're looking at a serious narrowing of that gap between the religiously unaffiliated and Christians. I mean, in 2070, they would still be not quite equal, but pretty neck and neck for being the majority religious group. I think it's pretty likely that switching rates will stay the same or maybe increase a little bit. So I think that this is a rather conservative estimate, if you ask me at least. Doesn't that really speak to just how huge of a majority Christians have in the US? I mean, if the biggest exodus of people from Christianity that Christianity has ever seen in our country continues for 50 years at the same rate, Christians will still be the majority religious group. Maybe not the majority of people in the US anymore, but still the majority religious group. Wild. Now, clearly the graph that I showed in the beginning was a different one. It had different assumptions built into its projections, so we'll get to that. Scenario 2, if switching continues to accelerate but brakes are applied, US nuns would be the largest group in 2070, but not yet a majority. So the rate at which people have been switching out of Christianity has been speeding up a lot in recent years. This is under the assumption that will keep happening. However, there are what they call brakes applied. By brakes applied, that means they're assuming in this scenario that the retention rate of people raised Christian would not drop below 50%. Once it gets to 50%, it stays there. That's based on some other retention rates seen in other countries, such as Great Britain, where the retention rate is about 49%. I tend to think that this is a more likely scenario. I think that switching rates will probably continue to accelerate for a while, but I doubt that the retention rate of people raised Christian is going to drop below what we're seeing in Europe today. The US is just so far away from that. I don't think that even in something like 40, 50 years, we're going to become so secular and so far away from Christianity culturally that it is somehow less Christian than Europe is today. So Yeah, applying those breaks in this scenario, I think, makes this a bit more likely, but also accelerating the switching rates probably makes it more likely too. In 2070, I will be 76 years old. So if I am still around, perhaps I will live to see the religiously unaffiliated become close to a majority. Perhaps I will even live to see us become a majority. That would really be something. I think I'll almost definitely live to, 2055, when the religiously unaffiliated are supposed to finally outnumber Christians. I'll probably live to see that. For better or worse, I'm sure some people will even partially blame me for that. Come on, all I did was make over 150 videos about atheism and skepticism and critical thinking and leaving Christianity. You can't pin all of this on me. I mean, there are other factors involved. There are other people. I don't take the blame for all of this. I'm just hedging because, I like to be optimistic, but I suppose it's possible that in 2070, with tons of religiously unaffiliated people, that some other quite nefarious force takes over our culture and minds, and we reminisce about the days when people just used to go to the nice Methodist church rather than, whatever we do today. Just throwing you a bone there, Christians watching. I appreciate you. Well, I imagine if you are a Christian watching, scenario 3 seems not ideal. Scenario 3, if switching continues to accelerate unabated, U.S. nuns would form a slim majority in 2070. Look at this. This is very dramatic, incredibly steep drop-off for Christianity. Only 35% of the population in 2070, and religiously unaffiliated being 52%. Really, can you imagine that? I struggle to imagine that. I know there's Europeans that must be watching going, what are you talking about? That's just what it's like here. I can't even imagine it being 35% Christian. I don't know how likely this scenario really is. This is if the switching rates just keep accelerating and never drop off. I don't think we're going to see switching rates just accelerate in perpetuity. Things will slow down after a while. Maybe the switching rates will still be, more than they are right now for decades to come, but they're going to slow down at some point, I would have to think. All right, scenario 4. If all switching had ceased in 2020, Christians would retain their majority through 2070. I know this one doesn't look dramatic, but we're still talking about, with no switching at all, 10% decline in Christianity over the next 50 years. That's still very significant. Religiously unaffiliated would only go up by 4%, so that indicates that without people switching out of, presumably, Christianity, the religiously unaffiliated population would continue to increase, but not nearly as fast. Other religions still chugging along, increasing by 6% over the next 50 years. I think that shows that the growth of other religions in the U.S. is not primarily fed by Christians switching to other religions. My guess would be immigration or possibly fertility rates. I don't know. We'll see. Okay, yeah, there are some more graphs in this study that break down some of the specific factors involved in all this. So let's take a look at those too. Christian identity used to be stickier. Now unaffiliated identity is stickier. What a strange way to put it, sticky. I don't think I can make any jokes about that would keep my monetization intact, so we'll just move on. Every time I say something like that, people are always like, oh, I don't get, what would you say that could possibly get you demonetized? If that's you, just show this part to an adult who you trust and have them explain that to you. You don't need that kind of talk coming from me, random guy on the internet. You see, when two unaffiliated people love each other very much, this video is about data visualization. Stay on track. Among U.S. adults raised Christian, this is the percent who are now. So 66% are Christian and 31% religiously unaffiliated, 3% other religion. That's for ages 30 to 39. But if you go over to age 40 plus, 80% of adults in the U.S. who are raised Christian are still Christian. Only 18% are religiously unaffiliated and 2% other religion. Now, among U.S. adults raised religiously unaffiliated, this is the percent who are now 21% are Christian, and 73% are religiously unaffiliated, 5% are other religion. That's for ages 30 to 39. So you can see there that for younger people, being religiously unaffiliated is a thing that, sticks with you more so than Christianity. So those increases that we saw in the religiously unaffiliated, that's not just because people are switching out of Christianity. Looks like a huge part of that is actually people just being raised unaffiliated and not switching into Christianity, actually. I wonder why so many more people are sticking to how they were raised and being unaffiliated. Have we reached some kind of threshold of feeling like there's a safety in numbers? Is there a certain amount of people that are unaffiliated now that kind of allows unaffiliated people to not feel pressured to convert to Christianity, and so they're not, unlike maybe they did in the past? Well, I won't get into that in any more detail, but I will be linking the article in the description if you want to read it yourself and figure out some of that stuff. Next graph, young Americans are now less likely to become or remain Christian. In 1990, 90% of young people who were raised Christian remained Christian, but now it's down to 65%. I think this one's even more shocking, actually. In 1990, 44% of people ages 30 to 34 would convert to Christianity. Imagine raising your child without religion and nearly expecting them to become Christian at some point. In 2020, 21% of young people who were raised non-religious became Christian. Still, very significant number, I gotta say. Now, there's a second half to this graph. Young Americans are more likely to become or remain unaffiliated. Keep in mind, again, this is ages 30 to 34. In 1990, 49% who were raised religiously unaffiliated remained that way. Today, it's 73%. Yes, it has become much stickier. In 1990, only 8% in that demographic who were raised Christian would become religiously unaffiliated versus 31% today. I imagine that makes some Christians very concerned or possibly just sad. Now, just to drive the point about religious switching home even harder, here are some graphs that look at other factors that influence religious populations. Transmission, fertility, migration, and later switching cause relatively little change in U.S. religious composition. Scenario 5, if every mother transmitted her religion to each of her children, looks like we'd still see a pretty massive decline there. Parents always keeping their kids in the faith does not look like it's going to stop the coming wave of the unaffiliated and the decline of Christianity. Scenario 6, if religious groups had identical birth rates, well, that just looks like unaffiliated would grow even faster, and the shrinking of Christianity wouldn't slow down at all. I've heard some Christians and even some conservative political pundits say that, well, Christianity is going to increase and the religiously unaffiliated will really decrease because we have such higher birth rates than them. They don't care about having kids. I mean, this data shows that, well, that's not really the case. If the unaffiliated and Christians had similar birth rates, then yeah, the unaffiliated would catch up to Christians faster, but regardless, Christianity will still decline and the unaffiliated seem to still be on the rise. It doesn't really matter about birth rates. If all migration to and from the US stopped in 2020, wow, so the unaffiliated would actually catch up to Christians even faster this way, and the decline of Christianity would stay about the same. I think that says that a lot of people who immigrate to the US are already Christian. If you read the article, I believe that they do say that somewhere in there. If we look at the growth of other religions in that scenario, it only goes up by 2 points as compared to scenario 1 that we looked at earlier, which would climb up to 13. So yeah, I guess immigration to the US is really the main thing that feeds the growth of other religions in the US. Scenario 8, if older Christians stopped switching. Not much of an effect. It seems like young people are really the driving force for the narrowing gap between the unaffiliated and Christians. All 4 of these graphs really show how important switching out of Christianity is and how important the stickiness of the unaffiliated identity has become. None of this is certain, obviously. No one can just predict the future perfectly. These are just extrapolations based on the best data available. Now, could Christianity potentially come back? Maybe, but this is what the Pew article I'm reading from has to say about that. Of course, it is possible that events outside the study's model, such as war, economic depression, climate crisis, changing immigration patterns, or religious innovations, could reverse current religious switching trends, leading to a revival of Christianity in the United States. But there are no current switching patterns in the US that can be factored into the mathematical models to project such a result. That's kind of unbelievable to me. It's not that I literally don't believe it, it's just with how I was raised, with the experiences I've had in leaving Christianity, with the pressure that I still feel both politically and culturally as a person who lives in Texas. Yeah, it's unbelievable. You know, I wonder how much of the Christian extremism that we see in politics today is a reaction to the numbers we've been looking at. There's a popular idea that when an ideology is kind of on its way out, it gets more radical as it shrinks. Now, I don't know if that idea has merit, but I do personally find it tempting to think that way. We should be careful in saying things like, that extremism represents the death throes of Christianity. I mean, Christianity is declining, but it's not dying. Even the most extreme models of its decline say that in 2070, Christians will still make up a larger percentage of the population than non-religious people do in the US today. If the rise of Christian extremism is a reaction to anything, I think it's a reaction not to the possibility of their extinction, but to their gradual loss of total control over American culture. That is what they're advocating for, right? Is total control. They fantasize about a past where white Christians dominated the culture, and today sociologists like Samuel Perry and Philip Gorski describe white Christian nationalism as aiming to build a nation run by a particular type of person, a white Christian, for a particular type of people, white Christians. There are plenty of Christians out there, I'm sure, who are saddened to see the decline of their faith, but who do not become radicalized as a response. There are probably some watching this right now, so if that's you, I hope you and I can be allies against extremism, agreeing that an America with fewer but still genuine Christians is better than an America where the government or some other group forces people to dishonestly claim Christianity. So, what do you think about the decline of Christianity in the US? Let me know in the comments. There's a lot more to this study, so it's linked in the description for you to read if you're interested. Also, after several requests, I've finally made an Amazon wishlist with equipment that would help the channel. If you want to help make my videos look better, then you can check that out. That said, please do not buy anything there unless you're doing it with disposable income. My channel will be just fine without new lenses and lights and stuff. The list is there for people who have money to spare and just want to use some of it to help me make improvements around here. With that, thanks for watching. I've been Drew of Genetically Modified Skeptic. A special thanks to my patrons for their constant love and support. If you want to hear more from me, then subscribe. As always, if you are an apostate in need, there are resources linked in the description to help you find community and mental health support. Remember to be kind to others in the comments, and until next time, stay skeptical.